Hey, welcome back. This is the second part of our habitat lecture. So if you haven't watched the first video, you should stop right now and check that one out first. So let's talk about the use of space. We looked at all the different components of it: the cover, the water, the shelter, the food. Excuse me. Now let's take a look at how we slice that as biologists. So here's a word that everybody's familiar with: territory. Uh, Turns out, though, that most people use this term incorrectly. And I'm going to read this to you verbatim here. Any area defended by an individual against intrusion by others of the same species apparently assures spacing in keeping with availability of food and other resources. So, timeout. It's only a territory if you defend it, and you have to defend it from others of your own species. So let's say uh, an animal has young and a predator comes in, and the animal tries to drive the predator away. That's not territorial. That's just maternal, right? That's protecting your young. But if I'm going to keep others of my own kind out, then I'm doing that apparently to assure spacing that allows with availability of food and other resources. So, in other words, the territory that I defend might be smaller if there's greater availability of food, water, shelter, and all the other things that I need. Territories might be larger if food is scarce, or water or cover or whatever else I need. This is a picture of a zebra, or zebra as they call it in South Africa, that I took in 2012, and we had just watched this guy go up and defecate in a pile that he previously had defecated in. This is a male that was marking the border of his territory with another male zebra. So this is territorial. Marking behavior is often associated with territorial behavior because you mark in order to tell others that you're there. It's like putting up posted signs. Now, I said it's often associated because some animals will make scent marks for a variety of reasons. Maybe you're only doing it to attract females. Maybe you're doing it as a way of communicating, but you still don't vigorously defend a territory. Black bears. I'm going to use black bears probably a couple times as examples. They are not territorial. Black bears do not defend a territory, but they definitely mark it up. So just because I don't defend it doesn't necessarily mean I don't want you to know that I'm here. It still might be very important to let others know that I'm around. Now let's compare territory to home range, because I'm sure you've also heard of this before, and I'm going to read this verbatim. The area an animal will travel during its activities in a specific period of time. So your home range could be measured on a daily basis or on a seasonal basis. Take this critter right here. It looks like we just stepped back into the ice age. This is a muskox, and I would be willing to bet that a muskox needs to travel differently during the summer and the winter in order to find what it needs. So its home range might be very different in each one of those seasons. And notice that the word "will" is highlighted in a separate color here. So home range is the area that an animal will travel. I'd like to give you an example. I just told you home ranges might vary from winter to summer, and I'd like to use black bears as our example here. So the blue in this map is Honeoye Lake, if you're familiar with Honeoye Lake. And those polygons there were drawn in a mapping program based on GPS data from a collared bear. So the larger polygon, that big giant one there, that was the area that the bear used for a home range in just the month of June in 2003. That bear, from its one end of its range to the other, traveled 39.8 square miles. In 2004, in June, that bear only traveled 15.4 square miles. That's that much smaller polygon that's butted up right against the lake. So somebody tell me why. What happened from one year to the other for this bear to travel such a shorter amount of distance? Well, I can't remember '03 and '04 to be honest with you. What if one year it was really, really rainy and the berry crop was fantastic, and the other year it was really, really dry and the berry crop was terrible, and the bear had to travel much farther in order to find its food? That's a possibility. It's also possible that that bear learned from 2003 to 2004 and figured out, aha, I found everything I need in a smaller space now. I'm smarter. I'm good. I don't have to travel as much. Neither of those are probably true, but both of them are possible. It turns out in '03, this bear did not have cubs, and in '04, she did. So part of what her home range shift was due to was the fact that she was not free to roam as quickly in one year as she was in the other. So she had to select a location where all of her needs and her cubs' needs would be met in a much smaller area, because cubs are like anchors, man. You just can't travel as fast with them. So, is it a home range or is it a territory? Well, here's the way to think of it. A home range may be shared with other individuals, but a territory is exclusive. And it sounds like an easy way to define it, but you could, I'll give you the lowdown here. You could have a territory that you defend, but you have cubs or young calves or whatever you want to call your babies. So it's more than one individual, but it's still a territory. Or you could be an animal that lives in a herd like these Asian elephants. And if I defend it from another herd, it's still an exclusive territory. Do you get that? So it isn't just about me living alone and keeping every other one of my kind out. I can have a family that keeps all the other of my kind out, or I can have a herd that keeps all of my other kind out. And that still counts as a territory. Make sense? Okay. Just to give you a couple ideas on how big a home range can be, I just happen to have these two photos from 2017. I put this PowerPoint together in 2017. That's why I use these guys as examples. In Australia, we actually went looking for an echidna and found one. This was a lifer mammal for me. And it turns out echidnas are, they're about the size of a basketball, like a sea urchin with legs, these guys. Their home range is approximately 140 acres. So, 140 football fields. Bald eagles, now depends on how good the habitat is, right? But I found a couple sources that listed home ranges of about 2,000 acres. So these two animals may weigh about the same, but the fact that one is nearly blind and snuffles along smelling the world, and the other one has an 8-foot wingspan that allows it to fly wherever the hell it wants to, means that they've got very different home ranges. If I was a manager, I would need to understand that about these two to effectively manage them. If I was a student that was creating a wildlife management plan for class, I would have to understand the home range of the animal I was trying to manage for. I'm going to give you one other vocabulary term that goes along with home range and territory, and that is cruising radius. And remember, I made a point back there to talk about home range as the distance that they will travel in a day or a season. The cruising radius is what you're capable of traveling. So whatever animal you have, you could roughly determine how far that animal could move in a day, in a season, in a week, in a month, whatever, and therefore determine how close the resources need to be for that animal's survival. So let's just take this mule deer as an example. If a mule deer needed to drink water every single day, and it needed cover from the elements, and it needed to eat every single day, then those three components need to fit within the cruising radius of a mule deer, or it is not going to survive very well. Remember, we talked in the last video about them surviving and thriving. So if those resources are in abundance and they're close together, the animal will be able to thrive because it won't be using up all its time and energy just to meet its basic needs. It will be able to exceed its basic needs. Make sense? So let's just take a look here. Now, I haven't listed every single thing, but we've listed a bunch of them. So all of these things have to occur close enough together or be adjacent to each other for an animal to survive. They have to be able to fit within the cruising radius of that animal. And if we're talking about an echidna, that means 140 acres. If we're talking about a bald eagle, it's 2,000. So I can have a bald eagle nest very far from water because they have the ability to fly long distance with no problem. Get that food, bring it back to the nest. An echidna, not so much. Please remember when you're learning these concepts that has to apply to all ages. So I've got two very different animals here, but each one with their young. So this is very much like that black bear slide that I showed you. That mountain gorilla with her baby, maybe she doesn't travel as far when she has a baby because it's harder for her to get around with that baby. So she has to have, if we go back, that cruising radius is probably smaller. She has to have all these things in a tighter area. And the same with that Wanako. If she's going to raise that baby, I know they've got long legs and they can move, but they just don't have the stamina. They don't have the long legs of the adult. So she probably has a much smaller cruising radius when she has young than when she does not. And not only does your cruising radius apply to all ages, but it also applies in all seasons. So just some pictures I grabbed of white-tailed deer in the fall, in the spring, and then a summer shot of a female with a fawn. All of these animals are going to need different things because we've got different sexes represented and different seasons here. So what I need in the summer may be very different than what I need in the fall or in the spring. That brings us to an interesting concept, and I must tell you that I love this concept of carrying capacity. And there's a specific part of it that I'm going to tell you about in just a minute and remind you that we've got a midterm coming up, and I 100% guarantee carrying capacity questions on that. Carrying capacity literally is what those two words break down to. It's the maximum number of animals that a habitat can support, but without detriment to the habitat or the population. It's not just how many I can cram together, it's how many can the habitat safely hold. Sure, I can jack up the population and eat everything in one season, and then I've got nothing left for next year. No new growth is going to come up because I killed everything. So that's not the concept. It's a sustainable concept. What's the capacity that this habitat can carry? And you ask that for each individual species. I know this is a fish example, but it's a pretty good one. Makes sense. You don't take a fish bowl and see how many you can cram into it. You take a fish bowl and you follow the recommendations on how many fish should be in it to keep happy and healthy fish. They need some space. They need some elbow room, some pectoral fin room in there. And I'm going to show you this again later, but it's worth talking about it twice because I've found over the years that although this concept seems to me to be very simple, for some reason students sometimes botch it. So every year you've got more babies of that species being made. That's why the hose is running. That's the annual reproduction. and they're being poured into that bucket. Now, that bucket has holes in it because the weather, human development, old age, all those things are going to cause animals to die. Just like on the right-hand side, starvation, accidents, predators, and human hunting, plus diseases and parasites. If we produce more babies than are killed, then eventually that bucket is going to fill and you have what's called an excess population. It's got to run out of the top of the bucket. And if those animals don't have anywhere else to go, if they can't disperse and spread to a new area, they would die as well. You okay with this? You can make your bucket bigger by providing more things that the animal needs. So if we planted more food, provided more water, more cover, or created more habitat for them, we could create a bigger bucket and we would be able to hold more water, which is the euphemism for holding more of this species. If we change from a bucket to a barrel, it makes it a little bit easier to understand the term limiting factor. So whatever resource runs out first, that's the factor that limits our population. So if food runs out before water and space and cover and all those other things, then food is what is determining how big our population can be. And so that stave right there, that wooden slat, the one that's the lowest, the water can't go any higher in the bucket because it keeps running out when it hits that. And if that represents food, well, what we could do is we could grow more food, and that would make that wooden slat be longer, and we'd be able to fill the bucket up higher until it reached the next lowest wooden slat. And maybe that one is cover. So we plant more cover for the animals, and we raise the population even more. Do you see why I can say that this is a simple concept, but people might need to revisit it a couple times? Because most of the time when this is taught, it's taught with this bucket or this barrel kind of a concept, and it takes people a while to get their heads wrapped around it. But I think you understand the basics of this, if we can just back up for a second. Even before I talked about this, I mean, you know that something's going to run out, right? Whether it's going to be food or water or cover. And if I provide more of it, then I could have more of that animal. And you instinctively also know that whatever runs out first, that's what controls the size of the population. You just didn't know the term carrying capacity, and you didn't know the term limiting factor. But neither of them are new ideas. You already know how to do that, right? So here's the challenge for managers. There's two kinds of carrying capacities. There's a biological carrying capacity, and there's a cultural carrying capacity. And this is the part of wildlife management that fascinates me so much. This idea that cultural carrying capacity is almost always lower than biological carrying capacity. Take coyotes, for example, here. That's a California coyote there on the right, and those are two coyotes from New York State, trying to become more than two coyotes in New York State. Our tolerance for coyotes is generally lower than the habitat's ability to hold coyotes. As the coyote population increases, hunters get angry, homeowners get upset when they see a coyote running through their backyard. So we sound the alarm before nature says, whoa, 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 there's too many coyotes. Black bears would be the same way. If we could get people to understand that living with black bears is a cultural responsibility that we have and not something to be feared, well, we could have more black bears in New York State because we'd have less complaints about black bears. Does that make sense? That's what cultural carrying capacity is. How much will society allow? I'll take white-tailed deer, for example. If you're a deer hunter, you probably have a much higher cultural carrying capacity in mind for whitetails than if you're a farmer. Farmers look at white-tailed deer as something that ruins their livelihood. So they have a lower cultural carrying capacity for white-tailed deer. Make sense? Do you see how this is working? Cool. I promise you we'll revisit this one more time, and I also promise you that you'll see this on the midterm. I try to give current examples, and in the fall, I had this as an example of cultural carrying capacity. So some of you that are in this wildlife management class are actually in my black bear class as well, and we just visited this tree on our field trip 2 weeks ago. And this is a camera that I have set at my father's property in Wayland, New York. And you can see where I've spliced these two pictures together. Where I'm standing, there's a shadow on the tree, and where the bear is standing, there's no shadow on the tree. I didn't try to make this to fool anybody. All I wanted to do was compare the size of these two mammals. Okay? And it turns out that I am not that much different in size, weight, smell, habits of a black bear. And I thought this was cool. I actually it's called blending these photos. And it turns out I was able to do one with my dad as well. So I have same tree, different camera. There's my dad. We got a picture of us checking the tree before we changed the SD card, and I spliced him in right next to a black bear. And isn't this a great picture? Think about this as you're a teacher, right? And you want to tell somebody how big a bear is and just how cool that looks. Well, I posted these images on a Facebook community group in Wayland because that's where these were taken. And I carefully explained to the group that these were blended images. And I pointed out that my dad does not have a right hand because it's got chopped off because I blended the two images together. And I talked about how the tree was dark in my picture and light in the bear's picture. And some people understood that and some people did not. And in the case of the people that did not, there wasn't a single person that yelled at me for being too close to a bear, right? They weren't worried about my health. They were worried about the safety of the bear. One person thought that I had killed the bear and tied it up and it was hanging from the tree like a deer aging in somebody's front yard. Another person thought that I snuck up on a bear behind them and that I was being a harasser to the wildlife. In this case, both of the people came to the defense of the animal. Wrongly, as it turned out, right? Like they didn't read, who goes on Facebook and doesn't read the captions? But both of those people thought that I was somehow interfering with the bears and they were sticking up for the bears. So at least I can give them that credit, right? Those are two people that I'm not worried about when it comes to helping raise the cultural carrying capacity of black bears. I do worry about them, for their ability to read, but not for their ability to stick up for bears. So if everybody vigorously defended bears and welcomed them into their community, we would be able to have larger populations of bears because we wouldn't have so many complaints. I really do think that's a good place to end this. Questions. Obviously, I can't answer them as you're raising your hand in your living room there, but you're welcome to send them to me on Blackboard. You're welcome to comment them to me on this video, but reaching me directly is probably a much easier way to go about it. Thanks for hanging in there, everybody.